Wow. Thank you, Tane. Years ago when I came here, I think it was 2016, Tane told me, he goes, "That's where I'm from." I said, "No way, I thought you were one of us." And he is one of us. I remarked to him how hot it was here. He says, "Oh my gosh, I feel so like it's overwhelmingly hot when I got off the plane." I'm like, wow. It is minus 19 back home this morning. And I don't know. I like it. It's Minnesota. It's where I'm from. Thank you for the invitation back. It's very nice to be here, despite the sweltering heat. I'm just kidding. My family's all jealous, so. Back in 2020, we went through this, right? We all remember this. And I think we all, in one way or another, remember the eerie feeling of having the streets, the arterials, the highways empty of traffic. I remember walking around my own small town and just seeing nothing there where there was always life and activity. And just having it be this strange, surreal feeling, something we probably hopefully never experience again. I'm a civil engineer, and going into the pandemic, the idea around traffic crashes, around traffic collisions, around fatalities and traumatic injuries centered around driver error, drivers making mistakes. The US DOT has put out a study saying that 94% of car crashes are caused by driver error, drivers screwing up, doing something wrong. And that's kind of embedded within the conversation we have about transportation. And so if we think about that, and we think about that notion, it's very clear, and I think engineers would have predicted at the beginning of the pandemic that as driving went down, so would deaths. So would crashes, so would fatalities, because they're a function of each other, right? The more we're driving, the more chances there are for people to make mistakes, and the more crashes there will be. With lots less driving, there's going to be much fewer instances where people can make a mistake, and thus the number of deaths would go down. This is a graph of traffic over time. And I put this up here to demonstrate how dramatic the drop-off was. We all experienced, we all saw it. Statistically, it was huge. We've not seen anything like this. It's unprecedented, yet that is not what happened to deaths, right? Fatalities went up during 2020. They went up again during 2021. They went up again in 2022. We've seen a continual rise of fatality rates, even though traffic is not where it was. Traffic is actually down. How do we explain this? Because the standard, like orthodoxy, someone yelled out speed. Okay, hang on to that thought. The standard orthodoxy within the profession does not really have an explanation for this. Because if crashes are caused by driver error and there's fewer drivers out there, there should be fewer crashes. Why is this happening? And enter, and here we are. Speed is a component of this, right? Go back to our blame the driver approach. The reckless driver, and I put the trademark there because it almost has become like a trademarked kind of phrase that we're using now. You see it pop up everywhere. The reckless driver. People are out driving recklessly now. In fact, let me show you some of the headlines that have accompanied this. 2020 fatalities survey shows increased driver fatalities. Look at that subheadline. Risky driving behavior, including failure to wear a seatbelt, speeding, drinking while driving, are contributing factors. As if suddenly, because of the pandemic, we just said, heck, we're all going to die anyway. We might as well drive without a seatbelt, right? I'm just going to drink and drive. What the heck, right? Pedestrian deaths spike in U.S. as reckless driving surges. Fatalities climbed to record levels 2 years into the pandemic. Authorities cite, so authorities, public safety officials cite what? Anxiety levels, larger vehicles, and fraying social norms. The pandemic has given us overwhelming anxiety, and we take that out by driving recklessly. We've got fraying social norms. We don't respect each other anymore, and so we're out driving with reckless abandon. It's not your imagination, people. Yes, people are more reckless. We're affirming that. Crash deaths have surged. Here's why. Simple explanation. This is a quote from that last article, which was from the LA Times. Reckless driving is, quote, a sign of the overall lack of consideration we're showing for other citizens, whether it be wearing masks or not getting vaccinated or how we drive. It's very aggressive. It's very selfish. Here's the thing about the reckless driver narrative. It is easy to believe. All of us, everybody in this room, has been out on a roadway in a car and experienced a reckless driver. And all of us have been frightened by that, or intimidated by that, or maybe provoked by that, right? We've all been in a situation where we identify someone as a reckless driver. Maybe we have been walking or biking and we have seen this, experienced it outside of our house, someone speeding by. We're like, oh my gosh, that's so reckless. I'm glad my kids weren't out there at that time, or my dog had gotten away, or what have you. We all know this, we've all experienced this. And so these narratives tap into something very seductive in our brains. At the very least, it taps into the idea and the notion that someone else is doing something wrong. If we take it a step further, we can categorize the wrong as those people. And there certainly is like a group of that going on now, right? It's the unvaccinated, it's the unmasked, it's the people we don't like who are causing this epidemic to happen. I'm gonna do a silent poll here. You don't have to respond. But how many of you, when you're out driving and you see that police officer parked on the side of the road in the speed trap kind of place, what is your immediate reaction to that? You slow down, right? You look at your own speedometer and you slow down. Why do you do that? Because you are a reckless driver trademark. You are. Statistically, you are. And if you were to gotten a crash moments before that, you would be one of the statistics of reckless driving. I want to talk about what is actually going on here. Because what's actually going on here, if we stop and understand it, we stop blaming victims, if we stop blaming the other and actually ask ourselves some questions about what happened during the pandemic, it actually reveals some deep truths about our transportation system, truths that should motivate us to want to do something fundamentally different. This is a graph that engineers are very, very proud of. The red line here, the one that starts in the upper right and goes down, is the annual deaths per billion miles traveled. And don't worry about the little details. I know some people aren't chart people. I'm an engineer. I'm required to show you at least 2 charts per presentation. The narrative of the red line is things are getting better. Fewer people are dying on our roadways. The blue line then is how much we're driving. That's vehicle miles traveled. And you can see the blue line goes up and up and up. And if you put this into the happy narrative of the engineering profession, what they will tell you is that despite the fact that we are driving more and more and more, driving has become safer, safer, safer. Fewer people per mile traveled are dying. This is because we've done great jobs engineering roadways. We now have seat belts. We're doing driver education. We're doing all these things to make roadways safer. Look at how great it's working. Here is a chart of average annual per commuter traffic delays over time. Forget that jargon. This is a graph of congestion. How much people are delayed by being stuck in traffic. This is a chart of congestion. Let me do something magical here and overlay these two. What do you see? As we drive more, our roads become more congested. And the amazing thing about congestion is that, where's my speeding guy over here? How fast are you driving when you're in stop and go traffic? Not very fast, right? It's really hard to kill someone when you are stuck in congestion. What the pandemic did is it got rid of congestion. And subsequent to the pandemic, what we have seen because of work from home and other things is that commuting, even though traffic has gone back up volume-wise, its distribution is changed. We're now spread out over longer periods of the day. There's fewer peaks where lots of people are stuck in congested traffic. And so what we see is that time where traffic congestion becomes the artificial traffic calming mechanism, that period of time is reduced dramatically. And all of us are experiencing the full engineered capacity of the roadway, the full engineered capacity of our local streets. And what we see is that people use that capacity in the way that it was designed and intended for. They use it to drive fast. And when you drive fast, particularly in areas with a lot of complexity, what we see is a recurring level of tragedy. We have engineered our local streets in ways that are fundamentally unsafe. And what the pandemic revealed to us, what the pandemic showed us, is exactly how unsafe they are. If we're going to fix this problem, and this should be a flaming urgent problem for us, this should be one of the things that, especially in this group, in this room here, motivates us deeply. We have to rethink some of our fundamental assumptions about how we build transportation systems. I want to focus in today on the idea of forgiving design. And forgiving design, I'm 49. I'm not old, but I'm starting to see it in the future, right? It's funny because I talk to students a lot, and I ask, how many of you have heard of this term? And none of them have. It's just design now. That's the way it's taught. I was taught this as forgiving design. And I think we were still celebrating at the time kind of the great innovations or the great deep insights of the early transportation profession, because a lot of my professors were part of that. Traffic engineering is a really young profession. We like to think of engineering itself, civil engineering, as being this old there's a joke, I'll tell it to you. You can tell me if this is appropriate or not later. We used to have a joke in school that civil engineering was the second oldest profession, right? Thank you, whoever gave me that thing. Engineers are not funny by nature, so that's Tane level of entertainment there, is what that is. Thank you, man. If you go and look, there's Roman bridges and Roman roads, right, that still exist today, and we point to those as great achievements of engineers. It's important for us to recognize traffic engineering is a really, really young profession. We have not been doing this all that long. And as I think a relatively young guy, had professors who were at the dawn of this, right? Who literally came up with the way we were going to do this. Forgiving design is one of the great insights of the traffic engineering profession. If you go to the early days of the automobile, remember that red line I showed you that went down? The death rate per mile traveled was horrendous. It was ridiculous. If we had the death rate today that they had in 1935, instead of 42,000 people a year dying on our roadways, it would be over 500,000. That's how dangerous our roads were in the early days. But think about it, because what they were doing is they were taking old cart paths and converting them into high-performance roadways. And so think of a cart path through the woods. If you come up to that tree or that rock or that gully, what do? You just go around it, right? It was not a big deal. You were driving a horse and buggy. But when you go out and put a high-performance surface on that and a high-performance vehicle driving on it, that rock, that tree, that gully becomes the thing that you hit. It's the death trap, right? And so forgiving design recognized that drivers are going to drive the speed they feel comfortable driving. And drivers, when they do this, are going to make mistakes. They're going to make errors that we can understand, that are very human kind of errors, and we can actually compensate for those errors within our design. Let me walk you through this. Here's a 2-lane roadway. Cars traveling in each direction, very simple. We recognize that sometimes a driver is going to float a little bit in their lane. Maybe they change the radio station. Maybe the kid is yelling in the back seat. Maybe they daydream slightly because they are human. They're going to float a little bit. And when they float, we don't want them to float across the center line and hit an oncoming vehicle. So what do? We widen out that lane a little bit. We give them a little bit more room to move. We forgive that mistake. Now we understand that drivers sometimes will go off the side of the road. There'll maybe be an obstacle in the road, or they'll wind up drifting a little bit off to the side. We want them to be able to recover and get back on their way without flipping their car or getting stuck on the side. So we give them a little bit of recovery area, right? We forgive that mistake. We recognize that sometimes drivers are going to leave the roadway entirely, and their vehicle is going to be traveling with a lot of kinetic energy. We want that kinetic energy to dissipate before they run into something that will not move. And so what do? We get rid of the trees. We create a clear zone on the side of the roadway. And now we have a forgiving design. Again, I'm going to pause here. Genius application of engineering mixed with an understanding of human behavior and intuition. We recognize that drivers are human. They are going to make mistakes. And we can design and engineer our systems to compensate, to forgive those mistakes. What is the problem with this approach? This approach is genius. It saved millions and millions of lives on the open road. But when you bring this mindset into our urban areas, when you forgive the mistakes of drivers, when you give people more lane width, more recovery room, more clear zone, drivers react as human beings. And they use that extra capacity to do what? To speed up, right? To go faster. And when you go faster in an urban area, when you go faster on a street, what we find is that all of those random complexities start to become like a roll of the dice, right? The car stopping, the car turning, the car moving in and out of traffic, parking, pulling out of a parking spot, the person walking, the person biking, the person unexpectedly crossing the street, the dog that runs out of the traffic, the kid that chases the soccer ball. All of these things become instances where the higher the speed are, the less the margin for error is, and the more you are just daily rolling the dice. We lack a coherent understanding of the difference between a road and a street. We do not have in the United States a mindset, let alone a process or a approach or an industry kind of standard for how we treat streets differently than highways. This is the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, sometimes called the Bible of the design, right? It says on here, the Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices for streets and highways. This is the book that is used to design the street out in front of this building, out in front of your house. Yet if we go to this book and we say, what is the difference between a street and a highway? How do you treat them differently in design? If you look up the definition of a street, it literally says street, see highway. We have no way of talking about these things differently, even though they are fundamentally different creatures with different goals and different attentions. And humans that are going to react differently within those spaces. This gives us this kind of incoherence where we go out and design something for 60-mile-an-hour traffic just to provide a good safety margin, a safety buffer for the driver. We then put the speed limit at 25, which we know is actually too fast for a complex street with lots of things going on. And then we witness people drive somewhere in the middle. And we are frustrated by this. Yet this is the logical outcome of our own design approach. There's a fantastic book. It's called Thinking, Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. It is not a quick read. It's a very thick book. It is well worth your time. If you take out of this conversation today one thing, it is, I will go read this book. I can summarize it for you in a sentence, but you really need to read it to experience it. The sentence I would summarize it with is, we are all slightly evolved chimpanzees, which is a true statement. I'm including myself in this, right? Daniel Kahneman and his colleague Amos Tversky spent decades working on insights on human behavior. There's a belief in the economics realm that humans are rational, that we make rational decisions, that we decide things based on thought and logic. And what Kahneman and Tversky demonstrated is that that is not at all true. Nothing like that. And this is why I say, you all believe, and I'm including myself in this, that we make thoughtful everyday decisions. I know what I'm going to have for dinner because I've thought this through. I know what I'm going to do with my life because I've thought this through. I know what I want to see on this design or in this place because I've thought this through. And the reality is that almost all of our decisions, even the big decisions, are slightly evolved chimpanzee types of thinking. Read this book. It will change your life, and it will change your understanding of your fellow humans and yourself. Kahneman talks about two different types of thinking. He talks about system one thinking and system two thinking. System one thinking is the intuitive, instinctual, very quick style of thinking. If I ask you what is 1 + 1, everybody in this room can say 2, and you don't have to do any work to do that. It just comes to your brain. System two is the deep, thoughtful, methodical kind of thinking. It takes effort. It takes energy. If I ask you to add up 4,553 plus 2,720, some freak in this room can do that like really quick, but most of us cannot. If most of us were going to do that, especially without pen and paper, and even with, we would have to stop, focus, push everything else out of our brain, and concentrate on that math problem. That is system two. My daughter is entering college. She took the ACT last year. She does competitive dance, and competitive dance is like a 3-hour practice of just aerobics. So this is a kid that is in like ridiculously good shape. When she got out of the ACT, she was completely wiped out. Dad, I've never been so tired in my life. What did she do for 6 hours? Sit at a table and fill in circles. She was wiped out. She does practice, not wiped out. Why is the ACT so exhausting? Because you're forced to be in system two for hours. Humans do not do system two. It is painful, it is difficult, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of effort. 95% of our time is spent in system one. Easy, casual, thoughts flow. 5% in system two. All right? Why have I spent so much time on this? Because driving is a system one activity. A lot of activists, a lot of people who want to blame drivers, and it's reckless drivers who are doing the problem here, and drivers should be more aware, and you're driving a 2-ton death machine, of course you're responsible for your actions. A lot of people want driving to be a system two activity, something that has 100% of your focus, 100% of your attention. If driving were a system two activity, only jet fighter pilots and race car drivers could do it. It has to be a system one activity because it's the only way it can actually be done by normal people. How many of you, when you're driving, feel comfortable enough to listen to the radio? Yeah. How many of you feel comfortable enough to sing along to the song? How many of you think it's safe to talk to someone in the passenger seat while you're driving? These are common things we all do. And the reason we do them is because driving does not take our full attention. We're able to do it in system one while letting our minds do other things. Once you recognize this, it changes how you look at our response to traffic crashes. It leads to this uncomfortable truth. People are going to drive, people will tend to drive the speed they feel comfortable driving regardless of any other factor. If people feel comfortable driving 40 miles an hour, they're going to tend to drive 40 miles an hour. Not because they are deviant, not because they are reckless, not because they don't care about their fellow humans, but because driving is a system one activity that we all do passively. If people feel comfortable driving 60 miles an hour, they're going to approach driving 60 miles an hour. This makes all of these campaigns to shame drivers, to quote unquote educate drivers, seem silly if not crass, right? There's a campaign that they ran in Texas that I just found horribly offensive. Some mistakes you can't take back. As if somehow seeing this ad in a magazine is going to shock you like 5 days later when you're in system one, driving, thinking about whatever, singing along to the song on the radio, to recognize, oh yeah, I'm the reckless driver now. This is not how human behavior works. And here's the thing, engineers know that, right? Think back to forgiving design. We recognize how human behavior works. I describe this at times too. It would be like if you had an employer who wanted to help employees deal with an obesity crisis in the workplace. And the way they did it was to buy donuts in the break room and have it just full of Oreos and cookies, but then in the bathroom put up a sign to say, watch your eating or something like that. This makes no sense. It makes us feel good as public officials. It makes us feel good as people who, have this narrative of the reckless driver. Boy, we can go shame these people. You should be doing this differently. There's something affirming to us as an actual tactic to reduce death on our roadway. This is offensive, ineffective, and offensive. There's an approach that engineers take to setting speed limits that in activist circles in particular is very controversial. They're not wrong. The engineers aren't wrong. I think we misunderstand each other a little bit here. When I was a young engineer, I worked for the State Department of Transportation, and I was the one who went out and did speed studies. I would go out with a radar gun and write down the speed people were driving. And we would have a mayor of a city call up and say, you've run a highway right through the middle of my city. People are speeding, they're driving really fast. Come out and do the speed study. And I would go out and I would write down how fast people were going and come back and say, yep, they are speeding. He's like, all right, what are you gonna do? And the answer was, we're gonna raise the speed limit. And the mayor would flip out. How can you do that? I'm here to tell you that that is the right answer on a highway. That's the right answer on a roadway. Because what makes a highway dangerous? What makes a roadway dangerous? It's not speed. It's not the speed people are driving. It's differential in speed. If you're on a freeway and the speed limit is 65 and everybody's driving 65, but one person is driving 45, that is a far more reckless situation than if everybody's driving 70. If everybody's flowing in the same direction at the same speed, it's very, very safe. When you get differential in speed, that's where you get all the problems. So if you go out and do a speed study and everybody's driving here, but the speed limit's set here, what's gonna happen is that some people are gonna go through and kind of force themselves into system 2 and stay at this speed. But the majority of people, because people drive the speed they feel comfortable driving, are gonna be driving at higher speeds, and you're gonna have speed differential. You try to set the speed limit at the speed where people are going to be driving. This works for highways. This is how we do things on roadways, and this is the way we should continue to do them. But remember I said we don't have a body of knowledge for local streets. We apply these same principles to local streets, and we shouldn't. When we go out and we do a speed study on a local street and we see excessive speeding, what's the proper response? We have to redesign the street. The street is actually sending the wrong signal to the driver. It's actually telling the driver that they can do something that they should not be doing. That system 1 driver operating in that environment is being told, you've got wide lanes, you've got forgiving design, we've got your back. We've taken care of all the problems here. Go ahead and drive a speed that is higher. We actually have to change the street design. We have a saying at Strong Towns, if you need a sign to tell people to slow down, you designed your street wrong. What does this look like to design a street to have people drive slow, right? It's the opposite of forgiving design. Instead of widening the lanes, we narrow them. Instead of giving a recovery area, we remove that. Instead of having a clear zone, we bring the trees in and we create some edge friction. What we want in areas where we need drivers to drive slow, 10, 15, 20 miles an hour max, is we need the driver to feel uncomfortable driving at speeds that are unsafe. And that uncomfortableness has to be a system 1 intuitive feeling It can't be something that they are given after the fact. I want to walk you through an exercise here, and this is the audience participation portion of this. So I'm glad Tane got everybody jazzed up, because I need you to actually, and this won't be with your phone, this will actually be human voices. You can all hear each other. When engineers go out and design a street, there is a process that they use to do this. It is a standard accepted process. It begins with asking, what is the design speed? And then asking, how much traffic are we expected to handle? What is the speed and what is the volume of traffic? Given those two inputs, we then go to the design manual and say, what does the manual suggest is a safe speed, or a safe design, excuse me. And then we ask the question, how much does this cost? It is these four inputs, speed, volume, safety, cost, that create, in a sense, not just a design approach, but an overall framework of thinking for street design. And I think we can categorize these as, in a sense, because of the way we approach it, because of the way that these inputs are done, they end up to be de facto the priorities of the design, the priorities of the designer, the priorities of the engineer. Now, if you ask engineer, what is your priorities? They're not going to tell you that these are the priorities, right? I remember being a young engineer and talking about the design process. Engineers like to call what they do valueless. But again, if we understand any system has values embedded within it. The values of our design process prioritize as a first salvo the speed that we are designing for and the volume of traffic that we are designed to accommodate over any of these other factors. This is my hometown. This is my house. That little sidewalk on the right is the sidewalk leading up to my house. This is not a live photo, obviously. There's about 3 feet of snow and a tauntaun running down the street. But this is what it looks like in the summer. You should all come and visit. Come in January. I mean, I don't know. I feel like get the full experience. But come in the summer. It's beautiful too. It's beautiful here as well. I agree. I love it, and I'm grateful to be here. This is what my place looks like in the summer. I want you to, in your own mind, think of your place, the place where you live. And if you're not happy with where you live, think about the place you would like to live. Or maybe a place you would like to work, or a place you would shop, or when you have guests come to town, the kind of place you would bring them to. I want you to hold that in your mind for a minute. And I want to ask you, if you're given the opportunity to design that street, if you're given the opportunity to say what values should be prioritized in that space, what would you put first? You're sitting down at the table and you're going to do the design. What is the first question that you ask yourself? What is the design speed of this section? What's the speed that I need to attain through my design? What is the volume of traffic that I'm projected to see through here that I need to handle? Is it safety? Is safety your top priority? I want to make sure that this is safe, a safe environment for everyone, or is it cost? I want to make sure that this investment that I'm about to make in this street is cost effective. And this is where I'm going to ask you as a group to say your priority together. Would you prioritize speed, volume, safety, or cost?
Safety. What's going to piss the people off the least and cost?
It's always one. We prioritize safety, and I hear there obviously are other people saying other things, but I think we all hear the dominant notion. And let me tell you that this is what I get every place that I do this. Of the remaining three, would you prioritize speed? We want to make sure that vehicles can travel at speed. Do we want to make sure that we can accommodate a volume of vehicles that we're projecting? Or are we more concerned about cost? What would be our second priority for this section? Is it speed? Is it volume? Is it cost? I heard a loud cost over here. I can't change these, by the way, so. I've done this with thousands and thousands of people in many, many different places, and I tend to get similar responses, right? It's interesting because when you get into deeply technical groups, like engineers, engineers will say safety then cost. They always say that. Why? Because they're human, like all of us. When I get in rooms that are mixed with politicians, I start to get other things because they overthink it, right? If you were to prioritize between safety and volume, what would it be? We want to make, speed and volume. We want to make sure that we can accommodate vehicles at a certain speed, but we will sacrifice volume in order to handle that. We'll handle fewer vehicles, but they can travel at speed. Or would you prioritize volume? We want to handle a set volume of vehicles, but they're going to have to travel slower. Would it be speed or volume? All right. Do you see what we did here? Do you see what you did here? I think it's really powerful to point out because we assume that people are going to flip out if we start messing with speed. We assume that if we're going to lower speed, if we're going to make things safer, we're going to prioritize safety over everything else, that somehow we're going to show up at that public meeting and people are going to flip out. We're going to go out and bill on the street and people are going to go nuts. And what I'm here to tell you is that I get this same general response, as I said, everywhere I go. Look at the person on your left. Look at the person on your right. Look at the people in this room. We all recognize what the priorities should be. So it's not difficult to enunciate. When you're in that meeting and you're making the decision, don't overthink it, as you are sometimes prone to do, right? Yes, there is going to be a person who will be upset about being stuck in traffic. There's going to be a person who's going to be upset about having to drive slow. But what you're going to find is that the majority, the vast overwhelming majority of people recognize this trade-off. They are willing to make it. When you can talk about prioritizing safety over everything else, you are talking in a winning way. You are not alone. This is a very human set of insights. We should not allow our streets to be designed with values that are different than our own. I want to end with this idea. And everybody in here has heard of the complete streets notion. I remember as a very young engineer, when I first heard of complete streets, in the office, we all kind of laughed. We all kind of thought it was funny. Streets are for moving cars. Like, why are we talking about all this other stuff? I think the early response of the engineering profession to complete streets was that kind of dismissal. Why are these do-gooders telling us to do this? I watched the engineering profession evolve over time to embrace the complete streets concept. A concept that, by the way, is very American, right? Kind of a separate but equal notion. Everybody gets a space, right? If you're in a bike, you get a space. If you're walking, you get a space. If you're driving, you get a space. If you're transit, you get a space. There's a little like Oprah to this, right? Like you get a lane, you get a lane, you get a lane, everybody gets a lane. I watched the engineering profession evolve on complete streets for two reasons. Reason number one, there's more money to do complete streets, right? If you're applying for a grant, if you're looking for a project, money for a project, if you're, it is the thing that could get you funded. And I'll just say this as a former consultant, When you're paid as a portion of the contract costs, complete streets are more stuff, cost more, better project terms, right? And we may be uncomfortable talking about that in this room, but that is a truth. Money made it more palatable, and we liked it better because of that. The second thing, though, and I think this is important to point out, complete streets does not require any compromise to the priority system of the engineer. The designers of the street can still approach it with a speed, volume, safety, cost mindset. That mindset is not challenged and, in fact, is channeled by a complete streets approach. A complete street accommodates pedestrians within an auto-dominated environment. And let me acknowledge here, this is a huge improvement over what we did before complete streets. Before complete streets, we didn't even care. We didn't even think about it. It was just all about moving vehicles. This is a huge improvement. But it is not the promised land. It's not the thing that we should be celebrating. It's not the place we're trying to get to. What we're trying to get to is something fundamentally different. A strong town, a great street, will accommodate automobiles within an environment dominated by people. It's people that build wealth. It's people that make a place great. It's people that buy a coffee, shop at a store, inhabit a house, fall in love, create art, create theater and music. It's humans that do all the beautiful things we're trying to accomplish. When we design with humans in mind, when we design with people in mind first, on a street, we get amazing outcomes. Streets are different than roads. Highway design, highway standards, highway approaches have their place. We do it here in the United States better than anyone else in the world. Everyone has copied us when it comes to highway design. But we are decades behind in our thinking on how to build great streets. And we are drawing from a body of knowledge and practice that was designed for something else entirely. We need a new body of practice for local streets. If this stuff is interesting to you, maybe I'll be back in 6 more years. We'll see. Maybe sooner. That would be wonderful. You can go to our website, strongtowns.org. We have a lot of conversations about this going on. If you haven't seen our stuff, please plug in. We're on every social media platform. We're publishing articles every day. We're sharing these thoughts in podcast streams and videos. We're trying to make it easy for you to not only get up to speed yourself, but to communicate these ideas to others. That's our entire reason for being around. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. Thank you for your kindness, and keep doing what you can to build great streets. Thank you.